Tragedy is a concept that is inseparable from Yakuza as a whole. By nature of these character dramas being rooted in the underworld, we witness numerous heroes of the series lose their loved ones, watched villains forsake their humanity while seeking fulfillment, and we've seen countless innocents get caught in the crossfire. All the makings of great tragedies in more ways than one. So, when you think of which character would be the most deserving of being labeled as the most tragic one within this world, a number of cast members could easily fit the title. And today's subject of discussion is, quite frankly, in a league of his own in that regard. This is Someya Takumi, a prominent villain from Yakuza 6, and a figure whose entire existence might as well be the perfect mirror to the concept of a tragic hero. He too has a virtuous side, is overburdened with an internal conflict rooted in idealism, and his life's journey ended in the greatest of misfortunes. But when you look at the actions preceding his untimely end, few, if any of them, could truly be defined as heroic. I feel that this is important to note, as this series has an unfortunate tendency of redeeming certain characters to where you're almost meant to forget that they were villains in the first place. With Somia, on the other hand, despite him being given a moment resembling a classic act of redemption by the end of the game, said act isn't utilized to undo the evils he committed, but to merely contextualize them, and that's precisely what makes him such a compelling culmination of RGG's writing. So, let's see what makes this character who he is, and what can be learned from his tragic journey. A great starting point in building a tragedy would be to establish a persistent theme, which, for the purposes of Yakuza 6, would be the theme of one's legacy. For the vast majority of the game, we have old geezers desperately clinging for relevance, trying to combat the dawn of a new age, and conversely, we also have a number of youthful Yakuza rising to prominence, through means deemed less legitimate than most. This is the age of money that has slowly been taking root over the course of Yakuza 1 through 5, and it finally appears as if the vast majority of the criminal underworld has fully shifted towards being sleazy businessmen with little to no moral compass. The kind of people that disregard concepts like honor, pride, or loyalty, and instead solve any problem by figuring out the price for which an individual can be bought. By all accounts, Somia is set as the quintessential poster boy for this new era, at least when we first meet him. He's got a pretty face to go along with his initially respectful mannerisms, but you can quickly tell that something is just off about it all. Like how this prim and proper persona tends to slip on occasion, or how Somia will try to elevate himself above others due to the perceived value he considers himself to hold in the current Yakuza climate. He reaches a point to where he deludes himself into believing that the Yakuza no longer live in an age of money, but rather a renaissance of the era where people like Kiryu rose to prominence, an age where power and cunningness reign supreme, and this delusion of his presents us with an interesting dichotomy to consider. Over the course of the game, Somia will exhibit behavioral patterns that could apply to one of two character profiles. The first one would be of a modern Yakuza that is more so a cutthroat businessman than a skilled fighter, while the other is of an old-school Yakuza forced to betray their beliefs in order to thrive in the modern world. The beauty behind all of this is that you can clearly see a steady switch between these two opposites as we keep interacting with Somia. To start off, moments like the meeting at the Tojo HQ, the chance encounter in Onomichi, and the eventual long battle culminating in the first boss fight with him are all crown examples of the first profile being reiterated upon continuously. We merely see Somia as a kid who doesn't understand the weight of the lifestyle he leads, and a person who is in no way a threat to Kiryu, at least with regards to physical prowess. Hell, he doesn't even have an Irizumi to serve as the culmination of his innermost beliefs and thought patterns, so why should we care about him in the first place? Well, it's because of the contradictions that gradually arise in his presence, many of which are a direct result of Somia's further exposure to Kiryu's personal philosophies. If you'll recall, these two were still at odds with one another as they fought their way through the remains of Shangri-La. They both searched for the same person, but with different goals in mind, meaning that another clash between them was bound to occur. What's interesting about this is that Somia, despite possessing the means with which he could have disposed of both Kiryu and the target Big Lo, refrains from pulling the trigger. This may seem insignificant at first, but remember, Yakuza 6 made it very apparent that this era of villains is utterly deplorable, and that they have no issue with going the cowardly route if it will ensure their personal goals are achieved. So the fact that Somya chooses a fair one-on-one fight in his position already elevates him above the likes of Iwami and Sugai. He doesn't even reach for his gun in the aftermath of the fight, even though he has clear issue with Big Lo labeling him as a mere puppet for the real villains behind this narrative. Which begs the question, why doesn't he retaliate? If you're presented with the hypothetical of Somya brandishing a firearm in a secluded place, and judged whether or not he would pull the trigger based on his earliest characterization in the game, logic would dictate that he would do it. That would be the course of action a pragmatic villain would go for, and up to now, we truly believed Somya to be in line with that archetype. But then, in the chapter following our second fight with him, we learn more about his personal life. We learn of the way he fell in love with Kiyomi, and later devolved into being an abusive partner, meaning that he has the tendency to lash out when something he values is threatened. So again, if all the signs point to him actually being impulsive and emotional beneath the surface, the polar opposite of a pragmatic villain, why would he show restraint here? Well, one could argue that the cause for this is a sudden removal of internal conflict, with said removal being the direct result of another person pushing Somya to be better. In the case of his personal relationships, it's pretty evident that he was an awful husband, and the nature of his violent lifestyle only ran the risk of further damaging his ability to form meaningful bonds with other people. But then, the humanity he presently lacked would slowly start to re-emerge when he'd take care of his daughter, seemingly the one thing in his life that he is truly proud of. Similarly, with regards to his life as a Yakuza, while his status in the underworld was the result of him falling in line with the manipulative patriarchs running the business, once Somya got to know Kiryu, he slowly started showing signs of what a classic Yakuza would be like. He finds himself torn between polar opposites, much like the audience is in trying to justify or condemn his choices in life, which gives Somya's character arc the qualities that you would expect from a classic Greek tragedy, in a sense, and the way his story concludes is perfectly in line with that form of expression as well. Prior to the point of no return, Somya suddenly seeks out Kiryu, wishing to warn him of the oncoming schemes and backstabbing, and this particular gesture is finalized with an incredibly bold, yet believable proclamation. This person, that we didn't think that much of in the beginning, now aims to take the Tojo clan away from Sugai's grasp and settle things with Kiryu once and for all. Now, had this sentiment been expressed at any other point in the story, you'd have thought this to be just another act of delusion, like the times Somya would elevate himself above the old guard of the underworld. But after having fought him twice, having learned of the darkness in his personal life, and witnessed the semblances of honor still left with him, you can't help but root for him here. You want to have that epic clash of ideals that defines this franchise of games be the final note of his character arc. And yet all the signs surrounding this meeting pointed to a much more dire conclusion instead. In the end, Somya doesn't challenge Kiryu by his own will. He is instead forced to play the role of a puppet yet again, to fight the person that pushed him to be a better Yakuza, also that he could protect the people who pushed him to be a better human being. Even by the merits of classic Yakuza character writing, this is a genuinely tragic setup, and the fight itself feels like the last stand of a broken man more than anything else, which is one of the many reasons why this fight is so revered in the community. We know Somya can't win, and he himself knows that Kiyomi's captors have no issue in ending her life should he fail to defeat Kiryu. Yet he still struggles to change everything. He puts his trust into Iwami being a man of his word, foolish as that may seem, because if there's even the slightest chance that Kiyomi survives as a result, then that's all that really matters in the end. To some, this final act of self-erasure may seem like just an attempt at redeeming yet another Yakuza villain, but frankly, this is the only way Somya's story could have ever been concluded. It's been clear from the get-go that he was a deeply conflicted character, both in his professional and personal life. And while we never learn of a key traumatic event that may have led him to reach this point in life, that doesn't diminish the outcome of his actions in the slightest. He never asks for forgiveness in his final moments, nor is he treated as a hero. He merely says his piece and makes a final request to save one of the few people who made him want to be better. The cause of Someya's own trauma or internal conflict didn't need to be outright stated, because a person never fully heals from the things that scar them in such a way. They simply learn to live with them instead. The same applies to the atrocities a broken person may commit as a result of said trauma. The idea of tipping the scales in your favor won't undo your past transgressions, but you can still choose to do better. Not for your own sake, but for the sake of someone that would deserve such kindness in your place. People like Kiyomi, Someya's daughter, and Kiryu. So, with that in mind, what was the purpose of Someya's character arc? Well, unlike with a number of villains preceding him, the purpose of his journey was not to be exonerated, but remembered, not to be celebrated, but understood, and in my humble opinion, it was all a resounding success in the end. There is more to RGG's characters than narrative alone, and even if you weren't a fan of Yakuza 6's story, chances are that you were enamored with some of its villains by nature of the accompanying boss fights. In the context of Someya's fights, they were all implemented as brilliantly as his character arc would necessitate. Each of them is a blast on a mechanical level. Two of the three have a dynamic intro. They're adorned with either distinct action sequences or gorgeous QTE segments, and the OSTs surrounding the fights are a perfect representation of the character at that point in the story. Seeing as we've already gone over the context behind each fight in the previous section of the video, here I would instead like to focus on how the accompanying music elevates the fights even further. So let's take a closer look at the two boss themes we got. Starting with Bloodstained philosophy, it's a perfect representation of a hybrid identity. Much like Someya's writing draws from both a place of modernity and a place of classic values with regards to the Yakuza lifestyle, so too does this instrumental combine polar opposite elements. In this case, techno and classical elements, all through the lens of an anthemic rock track. What's interesting here is that the more rock-driven tracks in this game's OST are either used to signify an old-school mentality, for example with Nagumo, or to amplify feelings of youthful rebellion, like with Yuta. But in both of these cases, the rock elements are used as the backbones of a track. In the case of Bloodstained philosophy though, they are merely used as embellishments for the other elements to shine. It's less about an explosion of energy, and more so about a restrained expression, like keeping one's true identity hidden away, which fits a character with no Irizumi rather well. Normally, thanks to the mythical beings we see in the ink, we can usually take a guess as to what kind of person the Irizumi's bearer is like. But when the canvas is clean, we are forced to be more perceptive. So this song furthers this sense of misdirection exceptionally well. The verse sections, being heavily orchestral in nature, feel like something befitting a Yakuza boss with a legacy behind him. Someone traditional, and not a young patriarch born from the age of money. So if you weren't intrigued by Someya's presence before, this edition would likely pique your interest regarding future narrative developments. Though, with all of that said, the second boss theme we got is the real gem behind Someya's character, and it's a track that might as well be considered tragedy incarnate. There's a multitude of things to note about the song called Destiny. The fact that it is entirely composed in D minor, often referred to as the saddest key in all of music, the fact that all the previously present musical elements are still here, but playing significantly different roles. The rock elements are now finally the backbone of the song, as you'd have originally expected. The techno elements now serve as embellishments, and the classical elements reign supreme, with the song featuring two heartbreaking violin solos to elevate the emotion of the song. Just the idea of a lone violin soaring in the midst of an instrumental that itself screams finality was a fantastic choice, and you can tell how the choice of notes in the verses shows restraint from the instrumentalist in question. Then, they are given a brief spotlight in the pre-chorus as the majority of the other instruments takes a step back, before finally immersing the listener in an expression that wasn't designed to be catchy, but instead was designed to be felt. It's a perfect escalation of intensity, And once you observe it in tandem with the hopelessness behind this final boss fight, it's enough to genuinely make you tear up. You have a character desperately throwing themselves into combat, knowing he might die for nothing, knowing that his efforts would never undo the damage he caused, but still pushing forward. The violin in the song might as well be Somia himself screaming into the void, hoping that someone like the Dragon of Dojima could somehow turn things around, like his legendary feats would have led you to believe. It really is the perfect song to lay such a remarkable character to rest, while also changing a legend's mentality in the process. I realize I used the term from the title of this video far too many times by now, but there's simply no other way to describe the essence of Somia as a character. Once we reach this fight, he's no longer a Yakuza, a villain, or even an anti-hero. He is quite simply a tragedy, and a beautiful one at that. So to all of you still listening, I hope this video made you look at the individual in question in a different light, and in the event you already adored him, I hope this piece reminded you of why RGG's writing is so amazing to experience. Few series have led me to ponder the complexity of its characters to the extent that Yakuza has, and anytime I make one of these videos, I find myself falling in love with the series all over again. So I'd like to thank you all for being here to listen. I look forward to seeing you all again with whatever video comes next. So, until next time, take care of yourselves and have a great day. Cheers!